Thank you very much, Mrs. Casebit, for your kind introduction. I'll try not to let it go to my head, but thank you. Before I start, let me say that it's always very difficult to speak after Dr. Nasr. One of the adabs, one of the principles of adab and etiquette in traditionalist school is in fact that a student would never speak in the presence of his teacher. And I have been a lifelong student of Dr. Nasr since 1965, and in the last 25 years or so have had the honor of being his colleague. We have been teaching courses together on different aspects of Islam, but I have never allowed myself to teach in his presence. And therefore, in a way, I'm happy he's not here. I also would like to thank the organizers of this conference, of this very, very timely conference, at the time that the Islamic world is going through one of its most difficult and darkest stages of its history. On the one hand, so many pseudo-spiritual currents. On the other hand, extremism is really giving a very, very ugly picture of this religion, which is nothing but beauty. And I have been asked, therefore, to talk about those aspects of Islam which usually we do not hear in the media and in very few academic circles, and that is the spiritual dimensions of Islam and the contributions of this dimension to Islamic intellectual history in many different fields as diverse as philosophy, art, and music. But I was given 50 minutes or so to speak about 1400 years of this tradition. And this reminds me of a story that we had a few years ago. In 2000, I had organized a conference here at George Washington in honor of Dr. Nasr. And we had invited Dr. Trachtenberg, who was then president of George Washington University, to give a keynote speech in 15-20 minutes or so. He started his speech by this story, which I thought is very relevant to my discussion here. And the story goes as follows. This is quotation exactly from what he says, and I later on published that in the book that you might have seen, Beacon of Knowledge, on the book exhibit. He said, this kind of invitation, this kind of request reminds me of the story of the Johnstown flood over in Pennsylvania in 1896. A man drowned in that flood, and when he got to heaven, he was very impressed by his experience, and therefore he asked St. Peter's if people would be interested in hearing about his experience. St. Peter's told him, okay, but be very brief. Remember, Noah is in the audience. So for that reason, I will try to be brief, and therefore what you are hearing cannot really do justice to the topic, and especially many of you may know most of what I want to say already anyway. Many historians of Islamic spirituality, what later on became known as Sufism, especially in Western academic circles, start any discussion of Islamic spirituality from the city of Basra, where Hassan al-Basri started teaching and guiding his disciple. In reality, however, the origins of Islamic spirituality goes way back to the person of the Prophet, and especially to this very blessed day of the day of Mi'raj, of his ascension to heaven. It is very important to emphasize on this, especially not only to show the connection of what we call Islamic spirituality to Islamic revelation, and also what Muslim spiritualists, or for that matter Sufis, practice to the practices of the Prophet, especially at a time that there are so many currents that claim the spiritual authority without really understanding anything of Islamic origins of what they claim to represent. And therefore, I decided to start from the time of the Prophet himself, and especially the event which is one of the most important events of Islamic history, the incident of Mi'raj, on Prophet's ascension to heaven. But before that, a couple notes are necessary to set the framework for that discussion by saying that the Prophet obviously had a dual function. By bringing the law, the Sharia, which in fact defines the framework within which Muslim lives unfolds. He functioned as a messenger, as a prophet who brought the law. And of course, there is no way that one can belittle this function and the significance of law in Islamic tradition. But equally important function that the Prophet performed, and that is the center of our discussion today, is the spiritual authority that he possessed by introducing the inner dimension of Islam, what we call what we call wilaya. Wilaya, in fact, is the essence of Islamic tradition. In a sense, it is the essence of every spiritual tradition within every other religion. It is the power and the grace that enabled Moses to turn his staff into a dragon. It is the authority and power that enabled Christ to give sight to the blind and to revive the dead. And it is the authority that made possible nocturnal journey of the Prophet to seventh heaven, so close to God's presence that has been described as a distance shorter than the distance, the length of two bows. قَابَ الْقَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, even closer than that. And that is where the Prophet went into prostration. There are very vivid descriptions of this journey, and I would like to quote a few of those descriptions very briefly that are narrated in most authoritative sources of Islamic history, both in the Shiite world as well as in the Sunni world. And Abu Sa'id Kharrat, one of the notable masters of Islamic spirituality in the city of Basra, said that Muhammad, peace be upon him, reached beyond the first boundary. God said he was a distance of two bows or closer. Then he was stripped off of everything with which the commoners clothed themselves. And he was clothed with the most select of robes of honor. Another authority, Wasiti, said he was asked what was the gift that the Prophet received from his Lord on the night of ascension. he said, He, God, clothed him in the cloth of his attributes. He permitted him to witness and addressed him face to face. The real, another quotation, cut the secret heart of Muhammad from all changes. He gazed at his Lord with the eye of certainty, and he became realized in the light of the real until the eye of certainty returned to him the real truth of certainty. He revealed to his servant what he revealed. I hope you notice some of the terms that are used in this hadith, in this narration, and see the relationship of that with Islamic spirituality. He is in fact speaking about 3 stages of the journey, starting from the knowledge of the truth, seeing the truth, and experiencing the truth. Ilm al-yaqeen, ayn al-yaqeen, and haqq al-yaqeen. These are stations of a spiritual journey. And these terms, as you know, found their way into the vocabularies of Islamic spirituality. There is even one more vivid and much more in detail description of this journey, which very clearly establishes the connection between Islamic spirituality and the prophetic tradition, and ultimately to revelation itself. And this is specifically narrated through the authority of a couple Shiite imams, directly from the tongue of the Prophet himself. And of course, we read in the Quran that the Prophet does not speak out of his whims. مَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. He does not speak out of his desires, but accept that which is revealed to him. And he speaks only the truth. This is what he said. The night they took me to my nocturnal journey, and I entered heaven, I saw a palace made of red ruby in the center of paradise. Gabriel opened the gate of this palace for me, and I entered. I saw a house made of white pearls. I entered the house, and in the center of the house, I saw a trunk locked with a lock made of light. I said, "Oh, Jabrail, what is this box?" He said, "Oh, Master, there is a mystery in that box that God would not reveal to anyone except whom He loves." I begged Gabriel to open it, but he declined and said that I should ask God for His permission to open the box. I asked for God's permission, whereupon He commanded Gabriel to open the box. I saw in the box a cloak, khirqa, and spiritual poverty, faqr, and asked what they are. A call came from divine throne that, quote, "I have chosen these 2 things for you and your community. Since I created them, I have not created anything that I love more, and I will not grant these to anybody but the one whom I love." End of quote. As you see, the nucleus of Islamic spirituality, what became known later on as Sufism, was in fact made on the very same night of journey. And therefore, it is said that when the Prophet returned from Mi'raj, he gave this cloak to Ali and initiated Ali and reportedly Sayyidina Abu Bakr into inner life, spiritual life. This is the cloak that Ali wore all his life, and quite often he said, I have made so many patches on this cloak that I am ashamed of the one who gave it to me. That means, that shows how dear it was to him. But also, along with that, the responsibility associated with the cloak. In a way, the cloak symbolizes the spiritual authority of wilaya, of the power and permission to initiate a person into a spiritual life. And Ali, while he was alive, he initiated a few close companions of the Prophet who, after the departure of Prophet from the world, had gathered around him. Individuals like Salman Farsi, individuals like Miqdad, individuals like Maysam Tammar, Kumail ibn Ziyad, and a few others. These are the people who became known in Medina community as people of divine mysteries, Ashab al-Sir. And these are the people that, in fact, in the Quran, there are two allusions to them. One saying, we shall give them to drink the water, the elixir of divine knowledge, ma'rifah, in abundance. لَأَسْقَيْنَاهُمْ مَاءً غَدَقًا. And also the famous statement of the Quran, which in a sense explains the relationship between this group of people and God himself. وَيُحِبُّونَهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَهُ. He loves them and they love him. The reciprocity in this connection is very interesting. This love first comes from God to those selected people, and then they in return express love to God. The period that we are discussing at this moment is in fact the period that one of the most eminent masters of Islamic spirituality, Abul Hasan Bushanji, explained in his utterance as the period that Sufism was a reality without a name. In other words, everything that has been said so far regarding Prophet's Mi'raj and initiation of his companions and the behavior of these companions and their status, in fact, is the period that these people practice everything that later on became Sufi practices within Sufi orders. 300 years before official establishment of Sufi orders. Through Imam Ali, wilaya was transmitted into two directions. Within the Shiite community and around and among people who called themselves, identified themselves as Shiite, it is spread through the Shiite Imams. The first 8 of whom we know were recognized as the pole of their time by Sunnis and Shiites alike. Every single Sufi order today in the Shiite world as well as the Sunni world, you will see in their genealogy have this first Shiite Imams in their silsila, in their chain of transmission of spiritual authority. And that is one of the reasons that every single Sufi order with the exception of one branch of the Naqshbandi order, who through one of the companions of Sayyidina Abu Bakr attribute their chain to Abu Bakr. All other Sufi orders trace their origin to Sayyidina Ali for this reason. It is interesting that by the middle of the 4th century of Islamic calendar, which is the 10th century, a very eminent authority of Shiite theology and jurisprudence speaks of the presence of halqa. Again, note the technical term used in Sufi gatherings, in which invocation of God's name prevailed. Dhikr, another technical term that later on was adopted by Sufi orders. Another Shiite authority, the famous Sayyid Murtada, went as far as saying that, in fact, the true Shiites are Sufis, or the Sufis are the real Shiites. Both versions were recorded. There's also a feminine dimension to Islamic spirituality in general, and especially within the Shiite universe in particular, which traces its origins to Sayyidatna Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet. There's a very famous hadith in Shiite tradition, narrated by some Sunni sources as well, known as Hadith al-Katha, which means the hadith of the cloak. This again goes back to the time of the Prophet returning from his ascension to heaven, which reportedly he invited Ali, Fatima, and their 2 children under his cloak. And mysteriously, this cloak covered all 5 of them. Then Jibreel joined them and brought greetings from God. The very presence of Fatima in this circle, which became the circle of initiation, in fact tells us that the spiritual authority is transferable through qualified women as well as qualified men. So it is not a domain that is limited to men only. And later on, I will give a few examples of very, very eminent women who were in fact instrumental in transmission of spiritual authority. The second channel of transmission of Wilaya through Ali spread through some of the students that he had trained during his life within the Sunni world. Some of these individuals became undisputed masters of Islamic spirituality. The first and foremost among them, Hassan al-Basri. And Hassan al-Basri died in the year 110 of Islamic calendar. So it's 7 something. Followed by several other people who in fact in the Sunni world became very, very important as channels of transmission of wilaya, spiritual authority. Bushr al-Hafi, Abu Sa'id Khawwas, Ibrahim al-Khawwas, Abu Sa'id Abu al-Khair, and Bayazid Bastami in Khurasan. All of these, in a sense, followed and performed the same functions within the Sunni world that the Shiite Imam performed in the Sunni world, in the Shiite world, with the difference that some of these scholars were at the same time the scholars of exoteric sciences in Islam, jurisprudence and theology. Some of them were not. And the Shiite Imams were all very outstanding scholars established in their own time. Therefore, long before we see that somebody like Bayazid Bastami, who died in the year 910, established the first official Sufi center in Khorasan. Or Junaid Baghdadi, who became the Sheikh al-Taifa, the Sultan al-Ulama, and very many honorific titles. We see that Islamic spirituality had found its way within Islamic history, within Islamic society, and it is almost 200 years after this date that we see the beginning of official establishment of Sufi orders, the first being, by most report, the Rifai order in Egypt, followed by Qadiriya order and Chishti order, and then many, many more new orders came into being. From here on, we see the appearance of two schools of thought within Islamic spirituality, each one with its own specific characteristics, specific features. While the doctrine was to actualize La ilaha illallah, the methods sometimes differed. One school, which is known as the School of Baghdad, was established by Junaid Baghdadi, died in 910, which is called the School of Sobriety. And the argument for using this term was how Junaid described by saying that in order to receive divine knowledge, one must be in a full alert state of mind, so that he would be prepared to receive the gift that is being given to him. Many eminent members of early Islamic spirituality in the Sunni world followed Junaid Baghdadi, who was at the same time a major theologian and jurist and the chief jurist of Baghdad, whose name and his authority in exoteric sciences was second to none at the time that he lived. And this became very important at one episode, which I'll come to in a minute. The other school expanded toward the eastern part of the Islamic world, toward Khorasan, in present-day northeastern Persia. This school, in contrast, advocated intoxication with the emphasis on divine love. Of course, I must mention that when the School of Baghdad places emphasis on sobriety in receiving divine knowledge, it doesn't mean that it excludes divine love. Without divine love, nothing is possible, of course. But love works like glue that connects all of these different elements to one another. But it is the expression, and especially open expression, that of love, especially in a society in the 10th and 11th century Baghdad, because of implications that it had, was very much opposed by Junaid Baghdadi and the School of Baghdad. Perhaps the most famous encounter between these two schools appeared in a conflict that gradually evolved between two major spokesmen of these two schools. On the one hand, Mansur ibn Hallaj, Hassan ibn Mansur Hallaj, who belonged to the School of Khorasan, even though he lived for quite a while in the city of Baghdad. And it is where he was actually executed. But nonetheless, he spoke in the terms and vocabularies used in the school of Khorasan. Openly speaking of divine love, openly speaking of the possibility of union with the divine, and ultimately uttering that on his tongue. When he started uttering Ana al-Haq, I am the truth. Of course, he never claimed that he was God or he was the truth. But what he was really saying was that there is nothing other than the truth, capital T, other than God. And of course, in an environment which is highly politicized in the city of Baghdad and highly influenced by jurists and theologians, speaking of something, a mystery like that, could be very, very dangerous, and it was. In addition to that, of course, Hallaj was very critical of the prevailing political and social and economic conditions, economic injustice, inequalities, and many other shortcomings that the city of Baghdad was suffering from. It is so interesting. There are a couple quotations that is recorded in the first Persian Sufi text, a kind of hagiography of Sufi saints in Persian that I like to quote, which are very telling, and of course I'll translate for you. When the conflicts between the school of Khorasan and Baghdad became more serious, and Junayd started criticizing Hallaj for what he was uttering, finally he was fed up. He told Hallaj that one day these utterances will take your head on the gibbet. You will be killed, simply. And Hallaj answered, the day that I will go on the gibbet, you will wear the clothes of exoteric people, i.e. a judge. And it's so interesting that this prediction came true. Let me read the Persian, and I want to read this especially because it is such a beautiful prose, one of the examples of masterpieces of Persian prose. جنید به حلاج هشدار داد که این گفتار سر او بردار خواهد داد. حلاج گفت آن روز که من بر سر دار شوم تو لباس اهل ظاهر پوشی. You will wear the clothes of the people, of exoteric people. In between, theologians and jurists went to Caliph and Nasser and asked for Hallaj's execution. Of course, Caliph was reluctant. Initially, he ordered them to beat him up. Perhaps he would wake up and change his attitude. But that, in fact, intensified his love, and he didn't stop. And finally, in order to make sure that all others are in agreement with the verdict that he wished to issue, he said, in order to ask for what you are asking, hukm Junayd bayad, means, in other words, if you want Hallaj to be killed, you have to bring a paper or a verdict from Junayd, because he was Qazi al-Ghuzat, the chief judge of the city of Baghdad at the time. And it's interesting, when they sent this letter to Junayd, he had to sign. Regretfully, but nonetheless, he had to sign. But in order to make sure why he's signing that, he added an addendum to the verdict, saying that اليوم نحن نحكم بالظاهر. Today, we are issuing a verdict on the basis of the appearance of what we see outwardly. God knows what is in the bottom. In other words, he says, Theoretically speaking, Hallaj's utterance of Ana al-Haq is condemnable to death, because outwardly it stands against the principle of La ilaha illallah. Inwardly, only God knows what is in his heart. And it was on the basis of this verdict that the conflict between the two schools reached its peak, and Hallaj was executed initially in a very, very murderous way. Very vivid description of that exists. First, he was crucified, then his organs, his limbs were cut off, and finally he was beheaded. And the next day, they burned his remains and spread the ashes onto the Tigris River. And this became a very, very important incident in Islamic history, and especially in history of Islamic spirituality. And it's interesting that way before this, in one of his poems, Hallaj had predicted the very same moment, the very same style of execution, when he wrote اقتلوني يا ثقاتي إن في قتلي حياتي وحياتي في مماتي ومماتي في حياتي. Oh, my trusted friends, kill me. For in my killing there is my life. Indeed, in my living there is my death, and in my dying there is my life. And ever since, Hallaj became this symbol of intoxication in divine love, and so many treatises have been written, and of course the most recent one being Massignyon's voluminous book on the Passion of Hallaj, which has been translated into English. He became a legend by doing what he did. Of course, not only Junaid, but many other authorities later on, masters, poets, condemned his action, because what he was really revealing was a divine mystery that was not supposed to be revealed just to everyone, precisely because of misunderstanding and misinterpretation that it lent itself into. Hafez, in a very beautiful piece of poetry, says, گفت آن یار کزو گشت سر دار بلند جرمش آن بود که اسرار هویدا میکرد. Somebody said that friend, meaning Hallaj, who was put on the gibbet, was executed, his sin or his crime was that he was revealing divine mysteries that he was not supposed to reveal. Many other disciples of Hallaj were very instrumental in spreading some of his ideas. Probably the most important of them was Abu Sa'id Abu al-Khair in Khurasan, and a little bit later than that Bayezid Bastami, and a long line of masters ever since. And it developed, the school of Khurasan developed in such a way that in many ways transformed Islamic spirituality. From what it was to what it became, especially in the Persian-speaking universe. If one wants to outline the major characteristics of the school of Khurasan, which not only in Khurasan, but later on spread into the subcontinent, Central Asia, East Asia, through Sufis, poets, merchants, businessmen, and so on, it is interesting to see what kind of socio-cultural impact it had on the societies that it penetrated into. Perhaps the most important feature of this school was changing the language of spiritual expressions from Arabic to Persian. one of the most important events which not only spiritually, but also socially, culturally, and otherwise played a very important role in the history of Islamic societies. It is not accidental that until 1865, when the British took over India, the language of the administration and the language of literary elite was Persian. The older generation of people in subcontinent still can speak some words of Persian, and it's precisely because of this channel that went through the school of Khorasan. One other feature of the school of Khorasan was institutionalization of the Sufi centers. This became a very important event in the sense that itself led to many other social, political, and in some ways economic developments also. And along with that, it came into connection with almost all social groupings that otherwise did not have much interest in Islamic spirituality, because among jurists and theologians, not only there was a sense of a pride as intellectual elite of the Islamic society, but also a sense of looking down at the common people, at ordinary people in the bazaar and so on. And most of these people, although not intellectually or educationally advanced or gifted, nonetheless, they had a pure heart. And these are the ones who were attracted into the school of Khorasan. And it is precisely for this reason that one of the most important social institutions of Islamic history appeared as a result. And that is the institution of Fatwa, the institution of spiritual chivalry, which initially started as, I would say, attitudinal movement among some ordinary people, but gradually evolved into a way of life, a kind of Robin Hoodian culture, protecting the poor, protecting the weak, and also showing generosity to the poor, and many other characteristics like that, but also very quickly wedded itself into the economic life of Islamic society by connecting to businesses in the bazaars. Fatwa organizations, both as an institution and also as a way of life, penetrated deeply into the inner fabrics of Islamic cities. As late as 1840s, the famous Egyptian historian Al-Jabarti speaks about the presence of 42 guilds associated with Fatwa organizations in the city of Cairo alone. And many more existed in other cities. In the bazaars of Konya, we have recorded, in the bazaars of Isfahan and Tabriz and Istanbul and many other cities, Lahore, all of these. In fact, businesses through wedding, through connecting themselves to the institution of Fatwa, did more than just spiritual practices for the common people. They, in fact, controlled the prices, prevented hoarding, prevented monopoly of any particular person, but also protected the interests of each guild within the economic system. And none of these would have been possible without the existence of first institution of Sufi center, Khanaqah or Zawiya or Takka, as these are different names of the same institution in Persian, Arabic, and Turkish-speaking world, and many other economic and social benefits coming from the institution of Fatwa would have definitely been non-existent. But it was not just limited to economic domain or social domain, but also political domain. It is partly through the Fatwa organization, partly through Sufi masters, that many political centers of power were pushed to moderation, so to speak. But Sufi masters did not do these things out of a position of weakness, but quite the contrary, out of a very strong position, out of position of strength. There are many stories, many anecdotes of Sufi masters encountering sultans, kings, caliphs, and so on. Perhaps one of the most famous is the encounter that Abu Hassan Kharaqani, one of the major figures of the school of Khorasan, had with Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna, who was a very powerful man, and on the way to conquer India. When he reached the city of Ghazna, he sent his minister. He had heard about Abu Hassan Kharaqani. He sent his minister to call him and give the message to him, because he refused to go and see the Sultan, the king. He sent a message saying to him, tell the Sheikh, haven't you heard that God said in the Quran, وَأَتِيُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأَتِيُوا اللَّهَ وَأَتِيُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولُو الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ? Haven't you heard that God says in the Quran, obey God, obey the Prophet, and people of command among you? And Abu Hassan Kharaqani gave a very simple answer. He said, tell the Sultan that we are so immersed in obeying God that we are not even concerned with obeying the Prophet, much less people of command among us. And of course, Sultan liked this answer very much. He couldn't say anything, and he went to see Abu Hassan Kharaqani. These sort of examples are quite frequent in Islamic history. I just wanted to give you one to see that when we speak about association of Islamic spirituality and its representatives with centers of political power, we are not talking about a bunch of people who would go and beg a sultan to forgive this city or forgive that city or do this or do that. They would actually, in a very subtle way, they would order them to do so. And the subtlety of the way they ask for what they want always prompted the sultans and caliphs to do what they were asking for. As far as the connection between Islamic spirituality and politics is concerned, I don't know how much time I have left, but...
about 5 minutes.
Really?
Sorry.
There are 3 examples that happened during the time of Mongol invasion, and of course the establishment of the Ottoman state, in which not only several sultans, Sultan Ahmad, Sultan Salim, were practicing Sufis, many other sultans had interest in Islamic spirituality, but also Sufi institutions were very closely intertwined with the state institutions, especially in military establishment of the state. The most powerful elite military group of the Ottoman state, the Janissaries, which in fact were established as a bodyguard of the Sultan, belonged to the Baktashi order of Sufism, founded by Haj Bektash Wali, a saintly man from Khorasan. And it was the interaction between these two that resulted in flourishing Sufism in the Ottoman Empire until the time when the Ottoman state came to its end in 1923. And of course, many of you know about the Safavid state, which started as a Sunni Sufi order initially, but in its drive to power became Shiite, adopted Shiism, and introduced Shiism as the official religion of the state. But it's interesting that in the process, something happened which became very detrimental to Sufism, at least for a while in the Persian-speaking world, the process that I choose to call popularization of Sufism. in the sense that many non-Orthodox practices and many non-Orthodox groups and individuals began to do a lot of things in the name of Sufism, which gave a very, very bad and negative picture of what Sufism was meant to be. And that is precisely because of that reason that in the Persian-speaking world, after 1600, very rarely do we see any saintly man using the term Sufism, Tasawwuf, or Sufi. Instead, the word Irfan and Arif replaced these two terms because of the situation that prevailed. Tasawwuf and Sufi had become very pejorative terms. The process continued almost until the beginning of the 19th century, that gradually Sufi orders began to put things together and purge Sufi orders from non-desired element, and then we came to the present situation. Now, there is plenty that I can say about the contribution of Islamic spirituality to Islamic intellectual tradition in almost every discipline, from philosophy to theology to literature, especially, and of course, to music. I don't know if I still have time to... A few minutes. From the time of the reported meeting between Ibn Sina and Abu Sa'id Abul Khair, in fact, the wedding between philosophy and Sufism, Islamic spirituality, it started and it continued, and especially by the time Sohrawardi established the school of illumination, the Ishraqi school, this wedding had become complete. And anyone who came after him, and especially during the time of the Safavid, with the establishment of the school of Isfahan, Mullah Sadra tried to, in a sense, create a synthesis between Shiism, Sufism, and philosophy in his school of philosophy that he called Al-Hikmah al-Muta'aliyah, the transcendent philosophy. In the field of literature, there is so much to say, and I'm sure you have read and heard about luminaries from Rumi to Hafiz to Attar, Iraqi, and many others who, in fact, in the form of poetry as well as prose, have formulated the Sufi doctrine, the doctrine of Islamic spirituality, of different version. In the Persian-speaking world, in Andalusia, we have had Ibn Majah and Ibn Tufail, who, with his treatise on Hayy ibn Yaqzan, the living son of the awakened, an extremely interesting philosophical / spiritual treatises in the form of a story. In the Persian-speaking world, the list goes on and on. Turkish literature probably would have not been what it is today without the presence of somebody like Yunus Emre, who is, in a sense, like Rumi of the Turkish poetry, and many, many other luminaries of that. One final feature of the conflict, of the relationship between Islamic spirituality and other disciplines is in the conflict that existed throughout its history with theology, not theology as a science, but theologians and jurists. These two categories of scholars being engaged very much in debates and discussion which was beyond the scope of Sufi interest, always were belittled and criticized by Sufi masters by saying that these are the sciences that have come from debate and discussion between and among those people whose mind and intellect are limited. In fact, there is a very famous saying by Yazid Bastami, one in Persian and one in Arabic. He said, "Masakin akhazu ilmahum mayyitan an mayyit, wa akhadna ilmana min al-hayy alladhi la yamut." These poor people, meaning theologians and jurists, they receive their knowledge from a dying man that gives his knowledge to another dying man. We received our knowledge from the living who never dies, meaning God. And also in attacking scholars of hadith, is somebody as eminent as Abdul Razak Sam'ani is saying that Ta chand az in haddasana wa akhbarana. This is the phrase that every record of hadith start, told us such and such, informed us such and such. تا چند از این حدثنا و اخبرنا یک تن نیست که سخنی از حدثنی ان ربی قلبی گوید. How long you are going to say we were told by such and such who was told by such and such, and the text of the hadith. There is nobody around to speak about I was told by my Lord of my heart, where the center where God resides. And that is why many of these masters, while not being highly educated, in fact had that which Sufism and Islamic spirituality required. As Rumi says, دفتر صوفی سواد و حرف نیست جز دل اسپید همچون برف نیست. The book of Sufi is not notebook and this and that, except a pure heart white as snow. Just final word on music. Perhaps one of the most highly criticized activities in the Islamic world, especially once institutionalization of Sufi centers started, where music and spiritual dance, sama, was initiated and became very, very popular. A lot of criticism was addressed against these practices. Common people identifying spiritual dance with the ordinary dance. And this is not something new. We hear this even today from some jurists or theological centers. But there is a description of that which is very interesting, and I'll read for that. It says, that excitement that appears in the heart of a Sufi is not dance in the ordinary sense of moving the legs and the hands or passion. It is the burning of the heart. And how far one is from the truth who calls this dance in ordinary sense. That state is the state coming from the truth, meaning from God. And that state which comes from the truth is nothing that can be described in words and description. The same criticism was addressed against music. Of course, there's so much we can talk about these, but as I said in the beginning, what I present is nothing more than an outline. That which could not be said in words or text or writings was always said with the language of music. مطرب آغازید نزد ترک مست در حجاب نغمه اسرار الست. The musicians started playing before the intoxicated Turk, meaning somebody who has reached spiritual realization. In the veil of music, he revealed the mysteries of the Day of Covenant. This is an allusion to the verse of the Quran when Adam was asked, Alastu barabbakum qalu bala shahidna. This is what music in Islam, in Sufism, was practiced and spread. And in any case, it is not an ordinary music for passion, but ultimately it is a music that narrates the pain of separation of us from our origins. As Rumi says in the beginning of Mathnavi, بشنو از نی چون حکایت می کند از جدایی ها شکایت می کند. Listen to the reed, that it narrates the pain of separation. It narrates the pain of separation. But sorry, Madam Chairman, if I went a little bit over time, but what I have said has been, as I said, just an outline of what I wanted to say or I could have said. If it has created some interest in digging more into any of these subjects, I think it has accomplished its purpose. But in any case, it was a humble effort, and as we say in Persian again, Barg sabzi tohfe darwish. It's a green leaf presented by the poor man of God. Thank you very much.